The silent alarm on my phone lit up at 2:07 in the morning. Most people would panic when they receive an alert that someone has entered their apartment while they're asleep. I didn't. I simply stared at the screen, because by then it wasn't the first time. It wasn't the 10th time. It wasn't even the 20th. It was the 37th. 37 times in just over 3 months. 37 times my daughter-in-law had entered my apartment without permission. 37 times she thought she got away with it. And that night, she finally made a mistake she couldn't take back. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. If a member of your own family kept sneaking into your home behind your back, would you forgive them because they're family, or would you treat them like any other criminal? I honestly want to know. Because when this started, I chose forgiveness. And that was my first mistake. My name is Walter Harrison. I'm 72 years old. A widower, a retired forensic accountant. For 40 years, I spent my career uncovering fraud, theft, and financial crimes. I built cases against executives who thought they were smarter than everyone else. I helped prosecutors put away people who believed they would never get caught. What I never expected was that one day I'd be building a case against my own family. The first time I noticed something was wrong seemed insignificant. A drawer was slightly open. A cabinet door wasn't where I remembered leaving it. A folder on my desk had been moved. Tiny things. The kind of things people dismiss. The kind of things manipulative people count on you dismissing. At first, I assumed I was mistaken. Age has a way of making people question themselves. That's what Megan was counting on. Megan, my daughter-in-law. The woman my son Daniel married 6 years earlier. The woman who somehow transformed my intelligent, independent son into a man who apologized for things he hadn't even done. The woman who smiled constantly and never meant it. The second time I became suspicious, money disappeared. Not much. $40 from a kitchen envelope, enough to notice. Not enough to prove. When I asked Megan about it, she laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, Walter," she said. "Maybe you forgot where you put it." Forgot. That word became her weapon. Forgot. Confused. Paranoid. Old. Every conversation somehow circled back to those words. At first it was subtle. Then it became routine. Then it became strategic. One afternoon I came home from grocery shopping and found Megan sitting in my living room. My living room. Using a key I never gave her. I stood frozen in the doorway. She didn't even look embarrassed. "Oh, good," she said. As if she owned the place. "I was checking on you." Checking on me. Interesting explanation. Because most people checking on someone don't go through bedroom drawers. Most people checking on someone don't search filing cabinets. Most people checking on someone don't open safes. Yet there she was, standing beside my desk, one of my tax folders in her hand. "What exactly are you doing?" I asked. She smiled. That smile. The one that never reached her eyes, making sure you're okay. I remember staring at her, trying to understand how someone could lie so casually, how someone could say something so ridiculous while standing in the evidence. But that's the thing about manipulators. The lie isn't for you, it's for everyone else. Because if they repeat it enough, eventually people start believing it. Especially people who want to believe it. Like my son, Daniel arrived later that evening. I told him what happened. I expected anger, concern, protection. Instead, he sighed. Actually sighed. Like I was the inconvenience. "Megan is trying to help you, Dad." I still remember those words. They felt worse than the break-ins. Because they told me something important. The problem wasn't just Megan anymore. The problem was both of them, and things were about to get much worse. Over the next several weeks, items began disappearing. Important documents, medication, personal records, bank statements. Nothing valuable enough for police intervention. Everything valuable enough for manipulation. Then one morning, something happened that changed everything. I came home earlier than expected. The apartment door was unlocked. I knew immediately she was inside. The smell of her perfume filled the hallway. I stepped quietly into the apartment, moved through the living room, past the kitchen, toward the bedroom, and there she was, standing beside my nightstand, holding my passport. My passport. She wasn't checking on me. She wasn't helping me. She was hunting, looking for information, looking for leverage, looking for access. And when she realized I was standing behind her, she didn't apologize. She didn't panic. She rolled her eyes. Rolled her eyes. As though I was interrupting her. That's when I stopped thinking like a father-in-law and started thinking like an investigator. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I documented every visit, every missing item, every text message, every excuse, every lie. And what I discovered terrified me. Because Megan wasn't just entering my apartment. She was building a narrative, a story, a campaign. One designed to convince everyone around me that I was losing my mind. And unfortunately, it was starting to work. Even Daniel was repeating her talking points. Even neighbors were beginning to look at me differently. Even people I'd known for years started asking strange questions. Questions that sounded suspiciously similar to Megan's. Questions about memory. Questions about confusion. Questions about whether I should still be living alone. I began to realize something horrifying. This wasn't random. This wasn't concern. This wasn't family drama. This was preparation. Preparation for something much bigger, something far more dangerous. And when I finally discovered what that something was, I understood exactly why she kept breaking into my apartment. But before we continue, I want to hear from you. If you were in my position and discovered a family member entering your home 37 times without permission, what would you have done? Would you confront them, call the police, or secretly gather evidence like I did? Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from. And if you're ready for this incredible journey, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Dorian's Revenge Stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. Because trust me, the real story hasn't even started yet, and what I discovered 3 days later changed everything. 3 days later, I discovered why Megan kept breaking into my apartment, and I wish I hadn't. Some truths change the way you see a person. Others change the way you see your entire family. This one did both. The discovery happened by accident. The most devastating revelations usually do. That morning, I was having breakfast at a small diner 2 blocks from my apartment. Same place I'd visited every Tuesday for nearly a decade. Same booth, same waitress, same black coffee. The routine comforted me. After Catherine died, routines became anchors. Something steady in a world that suddenly wasn't. I was halfway through my toast when I noticed Daniel's car parked outside. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was who stepped out, Megan, and the man with her. A man I'd never seen before. They weren't heading toward the diner. They stopped beside the car, talking, arguing. Megan looked furious. The man looked impatient. Then she handed him an envelope. A thick envelope. His expression changed immediately. He smiled, and suddenly the argument disappeared. A few seconds later, they drove away in separate directions. The entire interaction lasted less than 2 minutes, but something about it bothered me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was experience. Maybe it was the simple reality that innocent people rarely exchange cash-filled envelopes in parking lots before breakfast. I finished my meal and headed home. By noon, I had completely forgotten about it until my phone rang. The call came from Margaret, my neighbour across the hall. Margaret wasn't the type to gossip, which made what she told me even more disturbing. "Walter," she said nervously, "I think someone was asking questions about you." Questions. My stomach tightened. What kind of questions? There was a pause. The strange kind. I sat down immediately. "Go on." Margaret hesitated. "A woman and a man came by earlier." My grip tightened around the phone. "A woman?" "Yes." "Megan?" Another pause. "I think so." My heart sank. "What did they ask?" Margaret lowered her voice. "They wanted to know if you seemed confused." I closed my eyes. Not because I was surprised. Because I wasn't. Not anymore. They asked if you forgot things. They asked if you wandered. They asked if I ever saw you talking to yourself. Every word felt like a punch. Not because of what was being said, but because of what it meant. Megan wasn't just gaslighting me anymore. She was collecting witnesses, building statements, creating evidence, manufacturing a story. And suddenly, everything sense. The missing documents, the stolen records, the repeated accusations, the break-ins, the comments about assisted living, the conversations about memory loss. They weren't random. They were laying groundwork. Groundwork for something much bigger. After hanging up, I spent hours going through every interaction I'd had with Megan during the previous 6 months, looking for patterns, looking for motives, looking for answers, and eventually I found one, a terrifying one. Every conversation somehow led back to control. Control of my finances, control of my apartment, control of my decisions, control of my future. She wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to replace me. That evening, I called Daniel. I gave him one last chance. One. The phone rang 3 times. Then he answered. "Hey, Dad." His voice sounded distracted, like he already knew what the conversation would be about. "We need to talk." A sigh. Not again. A sigh. That hurt more than I care to admit. "What's wrong now?" Now. As though there was always something wrong with me. Never with Megan. Never with him. Always me. I told him about Margaret. I told him about the questions. I told him everything. When I finished, silence filled the line. For a moment, I thought maybe he finally understood. Maybe he'd seen the truth. Maybe he'd wake up. Then he spoke. "Megan is worried about you." There it was again. The script. The same script. Different day. Different accusation. Same conclusion. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. Worried! She's interviewing my neighbors, Daniel. She's entering my apartment. She's taking my documents. She's telling people I'm mentally unstable. His response came instantly, as though he'd rehearsed it. "Maybe she wouldn't be worried if you stopped acting paranoid." That sentence changed everything. Everything. The son I'd raised was gone. Not physically, emotionally, morally, completely. Because at that moment, he wasn't looking for truth. He was looking for convenience. Believing Megan was easier than questioning her, and weak people almost always choose the easier path. I ended the call, not angrily, not dramatically, quietly. The way you close a book when you realize the ending won't change. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room for hours, thinking, watching, listening. At 1:13 a.m. I heard it. A click, soft, almost inaudible. Coming from my front door, I remained perfectly still. Another click, then another. Someone was trying to enter, slowly, carefully, professionally. I stood and moved silently toward the hallway, every instinct from decades of investigations flooding back. The door opened, just slightly, a narrow gap, then wider. A figure slipped inside, wearing dark clothing, moving quietly, confidently, too confidently. I watched from the shadows, heart steady, breathing controlled, waiting. The figure moved directly toward my office desk. Not the kitchen, not the living room, not the bedroom. Straight to my records, straight to my files, straight to exactly where sensitive information was kept. And in that moment, I knew, without any doubt whatsoever, this had never been about concern. This had never been about family. This had never been about helping. This was a mission, a calculated one. And the person sneaking through my apartment wasn't looking for memories. They were looking for ownership. Ownership of my life. Ownership of my future. Ownership of everything I had worked decades to build. What happened next would provide the first piece of evidence I desperately needed. The first piece that would eventually bring everything crashing down around them. But before I tell you what I saw when that figure stepped into the moonlight, I want your honest opinion. Have you ever had someone twist your words, manipulate situations, or convince others that you were the problem when they were actually the one causing harm? If you have, tell me in the comments. And if this story is already reminding you of someone, don't forget to like and share this video. Because what happened next is something I wouldn't have believed myself if I hadn't witnessed it with my own eyes. And trust me, the worst was still coming. The figure stepped into the moonlight, and my stomach dropped, because it wasn't Megan. It was Daniel, my son. For a moment, I genuinely thought I was mistaken. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the darkness was playing tricks on me. Maybe there was some explanation. But then he pulled out his phone, turned on the flashlight, and walked directly to my filing cabinet. No hesitation, no confusion, no searching. Straight to the exact place where I kept my financial records. The exact place only family members knew about. I stood frozen in the shadows. Not because I was afraid, because I was heartbroken. There's a different kind of pain when betrayal comes from your own child. You expect enemies to hurt you. You don't expect the person you taught how to ride a bicycle, the person you carried on your shoulders, the person whose scraped knees you bandaged, to sneak into your apartment in the middle of the night. I watched him open the cabinet, watched him flip through folders, watched him take photographs. Photographs of bank statements, insurance papers, property documents, anything that looked valuable, anything that could be useful, anything that could help Megan. At that moment, something inside me changed. Not anger, not revenge, clarity, pure clarity. The last remaining doubt disappeared. Daniel wasn't being manipulated anymore. He was participating. He wasn't a victim. He was a partner, and that realization hurt more than anything Megan had ever done. I quietly stepped back into my bedroom, picked up my phone, and started recording. Not video, audio. I wanted proof, real proof. The kind nobody could explain away. The kind nobody could call paranoia. For 22 minutes, Daniel remained inside my apartment. 22 minutes. Not checking on me. Not helping me, searching, photographing, collecting information. Then he left, quietly. The same way he entered, the lock clicked, the apartment fell silent, and I sat there, staring at the darkness, thinking about every birthday, every Christmas, every sacrifice. Every moment I'd spent trying to give him a better life, all of it leading here, to this. The next morning, I made a decision. I stopped confronting them, completely. No more arguments, no more accusations, no more emotional conversations. Because emotional conversations only work when both people care about truth. Megan cared about winning. Daniel cared about avoiding conflict. Neither cared about truth. So I changed strategies. I became invisible. I smiled. I nodded. I played along. And they immediately became more careless. Manipulative people often make the same mistake. They mistake silence for surrender. A week later, Megan visited, using her copied key again. Except this time, I welcomed her. That confused her. I could see it on her face. She expected resistance. Instead, I offered coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, talking. Or rather, she talked. I listened, and the more she talked, the more she revealed. She asked questions. Lots of questions. Questions about my savings. Questions about retirement. Questions about investments. Questions normal people don't ask casually, especially not repeatedly. Eventually she smiled and leaned forward. "Walter, have you ever thought about assisted living?" There it was. Again. The same subject, the same objective, the same destination. I smiled back. "I've considered lots of things." Her eyes lit up. For a second, she thought she'd won. Then I changed the subject. The disappointment on her face was almost comical. She stayed another hour, pretending to be concerned, pretending to care, pretending to be family. But the mask was slipping. And once you see behind a mask, you can never unsee it. After she left, I reviewed everything. My notes, my recordings, my observations. And a pattern emerged. Every conversation led toward one goal. Control, not money, not yet. Control first, money second. Because if they convinced people I couldn't manage my affairs, everything else would become easier. Much easier. Then something happened that accelerated everything. A letter arrived. Official. Legal. Unexpected. The return address belonged to a law office. My hands tightened around the envelope. I opened it. Read it once. Then twice. Then a third time. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was a formal notice requesting an evaluation of my mental competency. Requested by family members, not strangers, not creditors, family. I sat there staring at the page, the room suddenly feeling much colder. Everything clicked. Every conversation, every accusation, every lie, every break-in, every question asked to neighbors, every attempt to paint me as confused. This had been the plan all along, and now they were moving forward. Officially, legally, aggressively. For several minutes I simply sat there, thinking, processing, realizing how close I'd come to losing everything. Because without evidence, it would have been my word against theirs. An old man against a younger couple. A widower against a carefully constructed narrative. And narratives can be dangerous when repeated often enough, especially in court, especially around people who want easy answers. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Catherine, my wife, the smartest person I'd ever known. She always had an uncanny ability to read people. Years earlier, she'd warned me about Megan. Not directly. Catherine was too kind for that. Instead, she'd simply said, "Be careful around people who treat kindness like weakness." At the time, I thought she was being overly cautious. Now I realized she'd seen something I hadn't, and I missed her terribly, because she would have known exactly what to do. Maybe some of you watching have experienced something similar. Maybe you've ignored warning signs because you wanted to believe the best in someone. Maybe you've trusted people who didn't deserve it. If that's happened to you, tell me in the comments. What's the biggest red flag you ignored? I'd genuinely like to know. Because looking back, the signs were everywhere. I just didn't want to see them. The following morning, I received a phone call that would change everything. A phone call from someone who unknowingly handed me the key to exposing their entire scheme. A phone call that transformed this from suspicion into certainty. And once I heard what that person had to say, I stopped thinking about defending myself and started thinking about building a trap. The kind of trap Megan would never see coming. The kind built not with anger, but with patience. And patience, as I was about to learn, can be far more dangerous than revenge. If you've made it this far, and you're wondering what happened next, make sure to leave a like on the video and share it with someone who enjoys stories about justice and karma. Because in the next chapter, someone makes a mistake so enormous that it gives me exactly what I've been waiting for. The first real opportunity to turn the tables. And trust me, when that opportunity arrived, I didn't waste it. The phone call came at 10:14 on a Thursday morning. At first, I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar. Normally, I let unknown callers go to voicemail. Something told me not to. Walter Harrison speaking. There was a brief pause. Then a woman spoke. "Mr. Harrison, my name is Rebecca. I'm calling from Silver Oak Legal Services, the same law office that had sent the competency evaluation notice." My pulse quickened. "I'm listening." Her tone immediately changed. Not hostile, not suspicious, concerned. The kind of concern people have when something doesn't add up. "I apologize if this is inappropriate," she said carefully, "but I felt obligated to contact you." That sentence got my attention. Immediately. "What seems to be the issue?" Another pause. Then she lowered her voice. "Your daughter-in-law called our office." I said nothing. Years of investigations had taught me the power of silence. People often reveal more when you let them keep talking. And Rebecca certainly did. "She called 3 times. Interesting. 3? Yes." The woman sounded uncomfortable. She seemed unusually eager to push the evaluation process forward. Eager. That word stuck with me. Because normal people worried about loved ones don't sound eager. They sound concerned. Scared. Conflicted. Not eager. "What exactly did she say?" Rebecca hesitated. "I'm probably saying too much." "Then don't tell me anything confidential." Another silence. Then she exhaled. She kept asking how quickly financial guardianship could be established. There it was. The moment everything became crystal clear. Financial guardianship, not medical care, not treatment, not support. Money, always money. The destination had finally revealed itself. Every road led there. Every lie, every break-in, every accusation, every attempt to portray me as incompetent. Money. I thanked Rebecca and ended the call. Then I sat perfectly still, thinking, connecting dots, following patterns. The same thing I'd done thousands of times during my career. And the conclusion was unavoidable. Megan wasn't trying to help me. She wasn't even primarily trying to remove my independence. She wanted legal control of my finances. Control disguised as concern. Greed disguised as love. Manipulation disguised as family. And once I understood that, everything changed. Because now I knew exactly what she wanted. And when you know exactly what someone wants, you can build a trap around it. That afternoon, I started preparing. Not emotionally. Strategically. I purchased 3 small security cameras. Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, tiny devices. The kind most people never notice. By sunset, Every important room in my apartment was covered. The living room, the office, the hallway, the bedroom entrance. Now all I needed was patience. Patience and opportunity. Fortunately, Megan provided both. The very next week, she became more aggressive, almost desperate. The competency hearing was approaching, and she clearly believed time was running out. She began visiting more frequently, twice in 1 week, then 3 times, then 4. Each visit felt less like concern and more like surveillance. One afternoon, she walked directly into my apartment without knocking, again. Except this time she wasn't smiling. She looked frustrated, agitated, nervous, and nervous people make mistakes. She paced around my living room, pretending to chat, pretending to care. Then suddenly she asked, "Walter, have you updated your will recently?" I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. Most people ease into questions like that. Megan charged directly at them, like subtlety no longer mattered. "Why do you ask?" She shrugged, trying to appear casual, failing completely. "Just curious." "Curious, of course. The same way burglars are curious about alarm systems." I smiled politely, then lied. No major changes. The disappointment that flashed across her face lasted less than a second, but I saw it. And once again, she changed the subject. That evening, I reviewed the camera footage. Something caught my attention. During our conversation, she'd spent nearly 20 seconds staring at my office door, not looking, studying, calculating, planning. That was the moment I made my decision. The trap would begin immediately. The following morning, I created a file. A fake file, professional, detailed, convincing. The label read, "Estate planning documents inside were completely fabricated records. Fake investment summaries, fake account information, fake asset reports." But one page stood out. A single sheet suggesting I had recently inherited nearly $800,000 from a distant relative. The number wasn't random. It was large enough to attract attention, large enough to create temptation, large enough to expose greed. Then I placed the file exactly where she'd see it. Not hidden, not obvious, discoverable like a piece of bait. Then I waited. 3 days later, she took it. Not physically, photographically. The camera captured everything. She entered while I was out, walked directly to my office, opened the drawer, removed the file, photographed every page, every single page, then carefully returned it, as if I'd never know, as if cameras didn't exist, as if actions left no footprints. I watched the footage that evening, and for the first time in months, I smiled, because now I wasn't guessing, I wasn't suspecting, I wasn't theorizing, I was documenting. The next morning brought something even more revealing. Daniel called unexpectedly. His voice sounded different, excited, hopeful, almost cheerful, and that alone told me everything, because Daniel hadn't sounded hopeful in years, not since marrying Megan. "Dad," he said, "how are you feeling?" A strange question, especially coming from him. "Fine. Good." Then came the real reason for the call. "Have you considered downsizing?" There it was. Again, the same script, different actor, different day, same objective. I decided to play along. A little. The reaction was immediate. His excitement doubled. "Really? Interesting. Very interesting." Because people don't get excited about someone moving unless they have something to gain from it. For nearly 20 minutes, he talked, and talked, and talked, not realizing he was revealing far more than he intended. By the end of the conversation, I knew something important. Megan had shared the fake inheritance information with him, meaning she'd believed it completely. The bait had worked. And now they were planning around money that didn't exist. The trap was beginning to close. Slowly, patiently, exactly the way it needed to. Tell me something honestly. Have you ever watched someone reveal their true character the moment they thought money was involved? It's amazing how quickly masks disappear when people think there's a prize waiting. Let me know in the comments. Because what happened next shocked even me. And after 40 years investigating financial crimes, very little shocks me anymore. A week later, Megan made the biggest mistake of her life. A mistake so reckless, so arrogant, so unbelievably foolish, that it gave me everything I needed. The evidence, the motive, the opportunity. And once she crossed that line, there was no going back, not for her, not for Daniel, not for anyone. Because from that moment forward, I stopped preparing for a defense and started preparing for consequences. Real consequences. The kind that arrive with handcuffs and court dates. The kind that change lives forever. If you're still with me, don't forget to like the video and share it with someone who loves stories where patience beats manipulation. Because in the next chapter, the trap begins to close, and Megan walks directly into it. There are moments in life when everything changes. Not gradually, not over time. Instantly. One decision, one action, one mistake, and suddenly there is no going back. For Megan, that moment arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I remember the weather because I was sitting by the window when it happened. The sky was grey. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The entire city seemed quieter than usual. I was reading when my phone vibrated. A security notification. Motion detected. Office camera. Immediately, my attention sharpened. Because I wasn't supposed to be home. At least, Megan didn't think I was. That morning, I deliberately told Daniel I was visiting an old friend across town. A lie. A harmless one. But useful, because lies reveal people. Especially greedy people. I opened the camera feed. And there she was. Megan, standing inside my apartment. Again. Except this time felt different. Very different. There was no pretending, no fake concern, no smiling, no performance. She wasn't acting like family anymore. She was acting like a thief. She moved quickly, purposefully, like someone following instructions. She walked directly to my office, opened drawers, checked folders, examined shelves. Every movement screamed urgency, desperation. And then something happened that made my blood run cold. She pulled a small metal tool from her purse. A lockpick. An actual lockpick. Not a hairpin. Not an improvised tool. A professional lockpick. I stared at the screen, unable to believe what I was seeing, because up until then she'd always hidden behind excuses. Concern. Family. Good intentions. Now those masks were gone. You don't carry lockpicks if you're checking on someone's well-being. You carry lockpicks when you're planning a crime. For nearly 15 minutes, she searched. Methodically. Relentlessly. Then she found something. Or at least she thought she did. The fake inheritance file. The same one she'd photographed earlier. The same bait I'd left behind. Her eyes widened. Even through the camera, I could see it. Excitement, victory, greed. The emotions practically radiated from her. Then she did something unexpected, something incredibly useful. She pulled out her phone and called someone's. The audio camera captured everything, every word, every sentence, every mistake. Daniel, just hearing my son's name hurt, but I kept listening. I found it. A pause. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. The kind of laugh people make when they think they've won. He really has it. Another pause. Then the sentence that changed everything. We just need control, before he changes the paperwork. I replayed that line 6 times, not because I hadn't heard it, because I wanted to make sure I believed it. Control before he changes the paperwork. There it was, their entire motive. Captured. Recorded. Undeniable. No misunderstandings. No confusion. No innocent explanation. Just pure greed. Speaking openly, confidently, arrogantly. Because Megan believed nobody was watching. Nobody ever thinks they're being watched until it's too late. The call continued, and somehow got worse. Daniel sounded nervous, hesitant, uncertain. For the first time, I heard fear in his voice. Maybe a small part of him understood how dangerous this had become. Maybe guilt was finally catching up. But Megan wasn't interested in caution. Only results. Only money. Only control. She spent nearly 10 minutes explaining how quickly things needed to move. How important it was. How close they supposedly were. Every sentence added another piece to the puzzle. Every word strengthened my case. And then she crossed a line I never imagined she'd cross. A line that transformed this from greed into something darker. Much darker. She started discussing my medication, specifically, strategically, analyzing it, tracking it, monitoring it. The realization hit me like a punch. She wasn't just interested in my money. She was interested in my timeline. How long I'd live, how healthy I was, how much time remained. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the screen, thinking about Catherine, thinking about my life, thinking about the fact that someone sitting in my apartment was actively calculating my future like it was a business investment. I've investigated criminals, fraudsters, con artists, embezzlers. But there was something uniquely disturbing about hearing family discuss you like a financial asset, like a problem, like an obstacle. When the call finally ended, Megan returned to searching. More aggressively than before. Drawers, closets, cabinets, boxes, anything she thought might contain information. Eventually she left, taking nothing, but leaving behind something far more valuable. Evidence, the kind investigators dream about, the kind attorneys celebrate, the kind judges pay attention to. That evening, I contacted an attorney. Not just any attorney, the best one I knew. A woman named Evelyn Carter. We'd worked together years earlier on a major corporate fraud case. Sharp, fearless, brilliant, exactly the person I needed. The following morning, I met her in person. I brought everything. The recordings, the videos, the logs, the notes, the timeline. Hours later, after reviewing everything, Evelyn removed her glasses and stared at me. For a long moment she said nothing. Then finally, "Walter." Her voice was unusually serious. "Your daughter-in-law isn't trying to help you. I know." She shook her head. "No, you don't understand. That got my attention. What do you mean?" She leaned forward, and the next words changed everything. "She's building a pathway toward financial exploitation." The legal phrase sounded cold, clinical, but the meaning was devastating. Exploitation, not concern, not misunderstanding. Exploitation. Even worse, Evelyn believed Megan was becoming reckless. Desperate people take risks, and desperate people make mistakes. Big mistakes, the kind that destroy them. Then Evelyn asked a question, one simple question. A question that would eventually lead to Megan's downfall. "Walter, if she believes you're hiding significant assets," she paused, watching my reaction. "What do you think she'll do if she believes she's running out of time?" The answer came instantly. Because by then I understood Megan perfectly. She'd escalate, she'd push harder, take bigger risks, cross bigger lines, and eventually commit bigger crimes. Evelyn smiled. Not because she was happy, because she saw the same thing. For the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. Not because revenge was coming, because truth was finally winning. Tell me honestly, have you ever watched someone become so obsessed with money that they completely destroyed themselves? Because greed has a strange effect on people. It convinces them they're smarter than everyone else, right before they make their biggest mistake. Let me know in the comments, because what Megan did next shocked even Evelyn. And Evelyn had spent 25 years dealing with criminals. The trap was working, the bait was working, and Megan was becoming exactly what we needed her to become. Careless, desperate, predictable, the three most dangerous qualities a guilty person can have. Because in the next chapter, she takes a step so reckless that even Daniel starts to panic. And once that happens, everything begins moving toward a conclusion neither of them sees coming. If you're enjoying the story so far, make sure to like the video and share it with someone who believes karma always arrives eventually. Because trust me, Megan's karma was already on its way. She just hadn't noticed it yet. The first sign that Megan was losing control came from Daniel, not Megan. Daniel. 3 days after my meeting with Evelyn, my phone rang just after dinner. I almost ignored it, then I saw his name. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Hello? Silence. Just breathing. Then finally, Dad? His voice sounded different, smaller, nervous, like someone standing at the edge of a cliff. Yes, Daniel. Another pause. I think we need to talk. I stared out the window. Rain was falling again. Strange how storms always seem to arrive at important moments. What would you like to talk about? More silence. Then, maybe in person. My instincts immediately went on alert, because Daniel never wanted difficult conversations in person. He avoided conflict his entire life. If he suddenly wanted to meet face to face, something had changed. Something important. We agreed to meet the next afternoon. A quiet coffee shop on the other side of town. Neutral ground. The kind of place where difficult conversations happen. When I arrived, Daniel was already there, sitting alone, looking exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, distracted. For the first time in years, he looked older than his age. I sat down across from him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then finally, "How are you?" A simple question, but somehow heartbreaking, because it sounded genuine. Maybe for the first time in months. "I'm all right," he nodded, looking down at his coffee. Then he asked something unexpected. "Dad, are you planning on moving?" Interesting. Very interesting, because I hadn't told anyone, not even Evelyn. The idea had existed only in my head, and yet somehow Megan already seemed worried about it. I smiled carefully. "Why would you ask that?" Daniel hesitated, and in that hesitation, I found my answer. Because guilty people hesitate. Truth arrives quickly. Lies require assembly. Megan mentioned it. Of course she did. Everything always came back to Megan. What exactly did she say? He shifted uncomfortably, then looked away. "She thinks you're hiding things." I nearly laughed. The irony was remarkable. The woman secretly entering my apartment believed I was the dishonest one. The thief believed the victim was hiding something. Human beings are fascinating creatures, especially when they're guilty. For nearly an hour, we talked, or at least tried to. Daniel danced around subjects, avoided direct answers, changed topics whenever things became uncomfortable. But one thing became obvious. He was scared, not of me, of Megan, and that realization made me sad. Because fear is not supposed to exist inside healthy marriages. Respect? Yes. Partnership? Absolutely. Fear? Never. Eventually, Daniel said something that stayed with me. Something that revealed far more than he intended. She just wants security. Security. Interesting word. Because people use it to justify all kinds of behavior. Greed becomes security. Control becomes security. Manipulation becomes security. Almost anything can be disguised as security if you choose the right language. I looked him directly in the eyes. When was the last time you felt happy, Daniel? The question caught him completely off guard. His mouth opened, then closed. For nearly 10 seconds, he couldn't answer, and that silence told me everything. Because happy people don't need 10 seconds. The answer arrives instantly. Finally, he looked away. I don't know. 3 words. 3 heartbreaking words. I don't know. The boy I'd raised. The man I'd hoped would build a beautiful life. Didn't know when he'd last been happy. And somehow that hurt more than the break-ins. More than the lies. More than the betrayal. Because it meant Megan wasn't just destroying my life. She was destroying his too. He just couldn't see it yet. When we finally left the cafe, I made a decision. A major one. I wasn't going to wait any longer. The trap needed a final stage, and for that stage to work, I needed to disappear. Completely. The following week, I quietly signed a lease. Not far away, just far enough. A luxury apartment across town. Private entrance. Secure building. No shared access. No opportunity for surprise visits. No opportunity for copied keys. No opportunity for Megan. Then I began moving. Slowly, carefully. 1 box at a time. No announcements. No conversations. No explanations. The fewer people who knew, the better. Within 10 days, almost everything important was gone. Family photos, financial records, personal documents, jewelry, computers, everything that mattered. The old apartment remained furnished, occupied, normal looking, but it was mostly empty. A shell, a stage, waiting for the final act. Then Evelyn and I took the next step, the most important step. The apartment was officially redesignated as private document storage for a business entity I owned. Completely legal, completely documented, completely enforceable. Warning notices were installed. Restricted access signs. Private records notifications. Every legal requirement satisfied. The moment that paperwork became active, everything changed. Because now unauthorized entry wasn't simply trespassing. The consequences became much more serious, much more expensive, much more dangerous. Exactly what Megan deserved. 2 days later, the bait appeared. A large steel safe. Heavy, impressive, impossible to ignore. Placed directly in the center of the apartment. Anyone entering would see it immediately. And attached to it, a single file. Visible. Tempting. Waiting. Inside that file sat information designed to trigger exactly the reaction I expected. The illusion of money. The illusion of opportunity. The illusion of victory. Human beings often reveal themselves when they believe nobody is watching. But they reveal themselves even faster when they think treasure is nearby. And Megan had always loved treasure. The following afternoon, the cameras captured her standing outside the apartment door, just staring, watching, thinking. She remained there for nearly 4 minutes, long enough to confirm exactly what I suspected. She'd taken the bait, completely. That evening, another notification appeared. Motion detected. Hallway camera. I opened the feed, and there she was again. Only this time she wasn't alone. Daniel stood beside her, looking uncomfortable, looking worried, looking trapped. Megan pointed toward the apartment, talking rapidly, animated, excited. Daniel shook his head repeatedly, at least 3 times, maybe 4. For the first time, he appeared to be resisting, and Megan appeared furious. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I didn't need audio. Body language tells stories too. Eventually, Daniel gave in. His shoulders slumped, the same way they always did, and together they walked away. I leaned back in my chair, thinking, watching, waiting, because I knew exactly what was happening. The safe was working. The bait was working. The temptation was growing. And temptation has a funny way of making people impatient. Tell me honestly, have you ever watched someone become obsessed with something they believed would solve all their problems? Money, power, status, revenge, anything. Sometimes people chase those things so desperately that they run straight into disaster. Let me know in the comments, because that's exactly what Megan was about to do. The following morning, I received a call from Evelyn. The moment I answered, I could hear excitement in her voice. "Walter, what happened?" A pause. Then she laughed softly. "They're moving faster than expected." That got my attention. "What do you mean?" Her answer sent a chill down my spine, because according to information she'd received, Megan had already started looking for locksmiths. Locksmiths. Not because she was locked out. Because she was preparing for something. Something illegal. Something desperate. Something final. The trap was no longer theoretical. The trap was active. And in the next chapter, Megan takes the single most reckless step of her entire life. A step that triggers alarms, police involvement, and consequences she never imagined. Because once greed completely takes control, people stop seeing danger. They only see opportunity, and that blindness was about to cost her everything. If you're still watching, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next chapter is where everything explodes. And trust me, nobody walks away unchanged. The call from Evelyn ended at 4:17 in the afternoon. For several minutes afterward, I sat in silence. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. Deep down, I'd known this moment was coming. The signs had been there for weeks. The increasing desperation, the constant surveillance, the obsession with money, the growing impatience. People can hide greed for a while, but eventually greed becomes hunger, and hungry people stop thinking clearly. By sunset, I had already made 3 phone calls, 1 to Evelyn, 1 to my security company, and 1 to Detective Harris, a man I'd worked with years earlier during a financial fraud investigation. Unlike television detectives, Harris wasn't dramatic. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't interested in speeches. He cared about facts, evidence, documentation, the things that actually matter. And after reviewing everything I'd collected, his conclusion was immediate. They're escalating. Simple. Direct. Accurate. They believe they're running out of time. Exactly, because that's what desperation does. It accelerates bad decisions. The more pressure people feel, the more mistakes they make. And Megan was under pressure. Massive pressure. The fake inheritance. The fake paperwork. The safe. The apartment changes. Everything had convinced her that opportunity was slipping away, which meant she would act. Soon. Very soon. That evening, I settled into my new apartment. The wall of monitors glowed softly in front of me. Every camera feed active. Every angle covered. Every entrance visible. For the first time in months, I felt calm. Not because danger had disappeared, because danger was finally predictable. And predictable danger is easier to manage than hidden danger. At 8:42 p.m., movement appeared on the hallway camera. Megan. Alone. She stood outside the apartment. looking around carefully, checking both directions. Then she approached the door. For nearly 30 seconds she examined the lock, studied it, measured it, evaluated it. Like a burglar planning entry. Not a family member checking on someone. Not a concerned daughter-in-law. A burglar. The camera captured everything. Eventually she left. But something about her behavior felt different. Deliberate. Focused. Like reconnaissance. The kind people perform before taking action. I immediately called Harris. "I think tonight might be the night." His response came instantly. "We'll be ready." That was all he said. No drama, no promises, just readiness. The next few hours felt unusually long. I watched movies, read emails, tried distracting myself. Nothing worked. Because every few minutes my eyes drifted back to the monitors. Waiting, watching, anticipating. At 11:53 p.m., another alert appeared. Motion detected, my pulse quickened, the hallway feed activated, and there they were, Megan and Daniel, together. The sight hurt more than I expected. Even after everything, even after months of betrayal, seeing my son standing beside her still hurt. Because some part of me kept hoping he'd wake up, kept hoping he'd choose differently, kept hoping he'd remember who he was. Instead, he stood beside her, carrying a duffel bag. And that bag immediately concerned me. Very concerned me. Because innocent people rarely bring equipment to family visits after midnight. They stopped outside the apartment. Daniel looked nervous. Extremely nervous. He kept glancing toward the elevators, toward the stairwell, toward the cameras, toward everything except Megan. Meanwhile, Megan looked energized, focused, determined. The difference between them was striking. One looked terrified, the other looked excited. For several minutes they argued. The camera had no audio, but body language speaks volumes. Daniel shook his head repeatedly. Megan pointed toward the door. Daniel crossed his arms. Megan became visibly angry. Then something happened. She grabbed his wrist, not violently, but firmly, commandingly. The gesture said everything. This wasn't a partnership. This wasn't teamwork. This was control. And eventually Daniel gave in. Again, just like he always did. The moment his shoulders slumped, I knew the argument was over. Then Megan opened the duffel bag, and my stomach tightened. Crowbar, heavy-duty flashlight, gloves, tools, real tools, not improvised ones, not innocent ones. Tools specifically chosen for forced entry. The trap had officially entered its final stage. I immediately called Harris. "They're here." His response was immediate. "We're moving." Then he hung up. I turned my attention back to the monitors. Heart steady. Breathing controlled. Years of investigations had trained me well. Emotion clouds observation. Observation reveals truth. And right now, truth mattered more than emotion. Megan approached the door, crowbar in hand. Daniel standing behind her, still looking uncertain, still looking afraid. For one brief moment, I thought he might stop her. Thought he might finally say no. Thought he might finally choose the right path. Instead, he stepped aside. And that decision changed everything. The first strike echoed through the hallway, metal against wood, sharp, violent, unmistakable. Even through the monitor speakers, the sound felt brutal. Megan attacked the doorframe. Not the lock, the frame, smart. Unfortunately for her, not smart enough. The second strike followed immediately. Then the third, then the fourth. Each impact splintered wood. Each impact created evidence. Each impact dug the hole deeper. Daniel looked physically ill, but he didn't leave, and that's important. Because sometimes people think guilt only belongs to those who act. It doesn't. Sometimes guilt belongs to those who watch and allow. After several minutes, the frame cracked, the door shifted, then finally swung inward. The apartment opened before them, and neither one noticed the silent alarm activate. Neither one noticed the automatic notifications sent to authorities. Neither one noticed the timestamp being recorded. Because greed narrows vision. People see what they want, not what's actually happening. Megan entered first. Flashlight sweeping across the room, searching, scanning, looking for treasure. The sight would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. Because the room looked exactly how I'd designed it to look. Empty, quiet, abandoned. Except for one thing, the safe, standing alone in the center, waiting. The moment Megan saw it, her entire posture changed. Excitement, victory, relief. It all flooded across her face instantly. Like someone finding water after crossing a desert, she practically ran toward it. Daniel followed more slowly. Much more slowly. The closer they got to the safe, the more uneasy he appeared. Almost like some part of him finally realized how far things had gone. Almost, but not enough. Never enough. Tell me something honestly. Have you ever watched someone ignore every warning sign because they were too focused on what they wanted? It's amazing how often people convince themselves they're safe right before disaster arrives. Leave your thoughts in the comments, because what happened next stunned everyone involved, including the police officers waiting nearby, including Detective Harris, including me, because Megan was about to make a mistake so spectacular that it would destroy every lie she'd spent months building. And once that happened, there would be no more excuses, no more manipulation, no more pretending, only consequences. If you're still enjoying the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because in the next chapter, the safe is opened, the police move in, and the truth finally explodes into the open. Trust me, the next chapter changes everything. The moment Megan saw the safe, she forgot about everything else. The broken door, the alarms she didn't know existed, the cameras she hadn't noticed, the consequences waiting just outside the building. Everything disappeared. All she could see was what she believed was $500,000, maybe more. Greed has a strange effect on people. It narrows the world, turns intelligent adults into gamblers, turns caution into confidence, turns danger into opportunity. And standing in that empty apartment, staring at that steel safe, Megan looked like someone who believed she'd already won. I sat in my apartment, miles away, watching everything unfold on the monitor. The room was silent except for the faint hum of electronics. On the screen, Megan dropped to her knees beside the safe. Her flashlight beam danced across the metal surface. She touched it almost reverently, like an archaeologist discovering treasure, like a prospector finding gold, like a thief finding exactly what she'd spent months searching for. Daniel stood several feet behind her, motionless, watching, uneasy. I noticed something immediately. He wasn't excited. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. He looked terrified. For the first time since this nightmare began, it seemed like reality was finally reaching him. Maybe seeing the safe made everything feel real. Maybe breaking into the apartment crossed a psychological line. Maybe he finally understood this wasn't inheritance. This wasn't concern. This wasn't family. This was a crime. Megan didn't care. She grabbed the handle, pulled, nothing. Locked. Of course it was locked, she cursed, then immediately opened the duffel bag. Within seconds she produced another tool. A portable drill. I couldn't help shaking my head. The preparation alone was astonishing. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This wasn't emotional. This wasn't impulsive. She had planned this carefully, methodically, for days, maybe weeks. Every second she spent drilling into that safe created more evidence, more proof, more consequences. Meanwhile, several blocks away, Detective Harris and his team were already moving, positioning, waiting, monitoring, giving her exactly enough time, not enough to escape, just enough to guarantee conviction. The drill screamed against the metal, loud, aggressive, relentless. Daniel flinched every time it touched the surface. Megan didn't. She looked obsessed, focused, almost euphoric, like someone moments away from achieving a lifelong dream. For nearly 20 minutes she worked, sweating, struggling, determined. Finally, the locking mechanism gave way. The safe door shifted, then slowly swung open. And what happened next was one of the most satisfying moments of my entire life. Megan froze, completely froze. For several seconds, she simply stared, confused, disoriented, unable to process what she was seeing. Because instead of stacks of cash, instead of gold, instead of financial documents worth millions, the first thing she saw was a folder, a single folder, labeled clearly, Estate of Walter Harrison Confidential. Her hands trembled as she grabbed it. Daniel stepped closer, the nervousness on his face replaced by curiosity. Together they opened the folder and found exactly what I wanted them to find. A financial summary. A very convincing financial summary. One that suggested I was worth substantially more than they'd imagined. Not hundreds of thousands, millions, several millions. Enough money to make everything they'd done seem worthwhile. Enough money to make arrest feel unbearable. Enough money to create maximum regret. I watched Megan's expression transform. Shock, excitement, disbelief, joy, then something darker, possession. Because at that moment, she wasn't looking at information. She was looking at what she believed should belong to her. And that belief is dangerous. Very dangerous, especially when combined with greed. Then she made another mistake, a huge one. She began talking constantly. Excited people always talk too much. That's one reason investigators love excitement. Excitement destroys discipline, and Megan completely lost hers. She started discussing plans, dreams, purchases, investments, vacations, new cars, new homes, a completely new life, built entirely on money that wasn't hers, money she hadn't earned, money she wasn't entitled to, money she was actively committing crimes to obtain. Daniel looked increasingly uncomfortable. Every new fantasy seemed to make him more uneasy, more aware, more frightened. At one point he actually said, "Maybe we should leave." Simple words, but important ones, because they revealed something. A crack. A tiny crack in the wall of denial he'd built around himself. Megan's reaction was immediate. Anger. Pure anger. She rounded on him instantly. Accusing. Demanding. Controlling. The cameras captured everything. Every gesture. Every expression. Every word. And for the first time, I think Daniel truly saw her. Not the version he'd convinced himself existed. The real version. The one driven by greed. The one driven by control. The one willing to destroy anyone standing between her and money. Even him. Especially him. Tell me honestly, have you ever had a moment when someone finally revealed who they truly were? A moment when the mask slipped completely. When you suddenly realized you'd been making excuses for someone who never deserved them. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Because Daniel was experiencing exactly that realization. And unfortunately for him, it came much too late. Back in the apartment, Megan continued sorting through the safe, desperately searching for more, always more. Greed rarely feels satisfied, it simply expands. No matter how much it finds, no matter how much it takes, no matter how much it destroys, then suddenly, the apartment filled with sound. A sharp voice, powerful, authoritative, unexpected. "Police, don't move!" Everything stopped, instantly. The reaction was almost surreal. Megan froze. Daniel froze. The flashlight slipped from Megan's hand, clattered across the floor. For a brief moment, neither of them seemed capable of understanding what was happening. Because people who believe they're winning never expect consequences to arrive so quickly. Then officers entered. Several of them. Fast. Controlled. Professional. The entire apartment transformed in seconds. What had looked like a treasure hunt now looked exactly what it truly was. A crime scene. Megan's face lost all color. Daniel looked like he might collapse. And standing in front of them, Detective Harris calmly surveyed the room. The broken door, the crowbar, the drill, the safe, the documents, the evidence, months of planning, months of manipulation, months of lies. All reduced to a single moment, a single room, a single arrest. But what happened next shocked everyone. Because instead of denying everything, instead of remaining silent, instead of asking for an attorney, Megan started talking. And once she started talking, she couldn't stop. The next chapter contains the final collapse, the arrests, the courtroom, Daniel's choice, and the moment Megan realizes exactly how badly she underestimated me. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves stories where justice arrives right on time. Because the final chapter is where every lie catches up with the people who created it. And trust me, the ending is even more satisfying than the arrest. The moment Detective Harris stepped into the apartment, everything changed. Not for me, for Megan. Because for months, she'd been operating in a world where consequences didn't exist. A world where she controlled the narrative. A world where every lie worked, every manipulation succeeded, every accusation stuck. But reality has a way of arriving all at once. And reality had just kicked down the door. The officers moved quickly, professional, efficient, calm. Within seconds, the crowbar was secured. The drill was secured. The safe area was secured. The entire scene was preserved exactly as it existed when they entered. Every piece of evidence, every tool, every document, everything. Megan looked stunned, not scared, not yet, stunned, because deep down, she genuinely believed she was smarter than everyone else. People like Megan always do. They mistake getting away with something for intelligence. Until the day they don't get away with it. Then reality becomes very confusing. Detective Harris calmly looked around the room. Then at Megan. Then at Daniel. Finally he spoke. Interesting evening. No anger, no shouting, just facts. The most dangerous thing for guilty people. Megan immediately launched into an explanation. A terrible explanation. The kind people invent when they're caught. We were checking on him. At 2 a.m, with a crowbar and a drill. Inside a broken apartment. Even Harris looked amused. Only slightly. But enough. Daniel closed his eyes. I think that was the moment he realized it was over. Completely over. Because even he couldn't believe that excuse. Not anymore. The officers began asking questions. Simple questions. Questions honest people answer easily. Questions guilty people hate. Who owned the tools? Why break the door? Why enter the apartment? Why open the safe? Why photograph documents? Every answer created new problems. Every explanation contradicted another explanation. The lies began collapsing under their own weight. one after another, exactly as lies always do. Eventually, Harris opened the folder they'd removed from the safe. The same folder Megan thought contained her future. He flipped through it casually, then smiled, not because it was funny, because he'd immediately recognized what it was. A trap. A beautifully documented trap. The look on Megan's face when she realized she'd been chasing fake information for weeks was unforgettable. The shock, the humiliation, the disbelief, all at once. For months she'd imagined wealth, control, victory, and now she was standing in handcuffs holding paperwork that meant absolutely nothing. I won't pretend I enjoyed seeing someone suffer. But I will admit this, I felt relief, enormous relief, because the nightmare was finally ending. Not with arguments, not with revenge, with truth. And truth is remarkably powerful, especially when it's documented. The arrests happened shortly afterward. Professional, orderly. I watched the entire thing from my apartment. Silent, thoughtful, tired, very tired. Months of stress had finally caught up with me. The next morning, Detective Harris visited personally. He arrived carrying a thick folder. Evidence, reports, statements, everything. He placed it on my table, then sat quietly for a moment. Finally, he spoke. "You know what surprises me?" I shook my what? He leaned back. "Most criminals eventually panic." I nodded. "She never did." "No." He smiled slightly. "She believed she was right." That sentence stayed with me, because it explained everything. Megan never saw herself as a thief, never saw herself as manipulative, never saw herself as greedy. In her mind, she was entitled, and entitlement is dangerous, more dangerous than greed, because greedy people know they're doing wrong. Entitled people convince themselves they're doing right. Even while hurting others, even while breaking laws, even while destroying lives. The legal process moved quickly after that, much quicker than I expected. The evidence was overwhelming. Video footage, audio recordings, witness statements, forced entry, attempted theft, conspiracy, everything documented, everything undeniable. And then came the day I never wanted to experience. Court, not because I feared the outcome, because I knew who I'd see there. Daniel, my son. The courtroom felt colder than I expected. Maybe all courtrooms feel that way. Or maybe it was the situation. When Daniel entered, I barely recognized him. He looked exhausted, broken, older, like someone who'd aged 10 years in 10 months. For a brief moment our eyes met. Neither of us looked away. Neither of us smiled. Neither of us spoke. There wasn't much left to say. The evidence presentation lasted hours. Video after video, recording after recording, timeline after timeline. Each piece making the picture clearer. Each piece making denial harder. Megan sat quietly through most of it, but I watched her carefully. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She looked confused, as though she still couldn't understand how she'd lost, as though consequences were somehow unfair. And that told me everything I needed to know. When people learn from mistakes, they accept responsibility. When they don't, they blame circumstances. Megan blamed circumstances. The verdict wasn't surprising. The judge was remarkably direct, particularly when discussing the pattern of manipulation and financial exploitation. The sentence reflected that. And just like that, it was over. Months of fear, months of lies, months of betrayal, finished. But the hardest part came afterward. Not the courtroom, not the verdict, Daniel. Several weeks later, he called. For the first time in months, I almost didn't answer. Eventually I did. Neither of us spoke immediately. Then finally, "I'm sorry, Dad." 3 words. Simple, painful, powerful. I closed my eyes because I'd wanted to hear those words for a very long time. Not because they fixed everything, because they were honest. And honesty was something we'd both needed. For nearly an hour we talked, really talked. No scripts, no excuses, no manipulation, just truth. The conversation didn't repair everything. Some damage takes years, some damage never fully heals. But it was a beginning. And sometimes beginnings are enough. Today, as I tell you this story, life is peaceful again. The new apartment feels like home. The cameras are gone. The anxiety is gone. The constant suspicion is gone. Most importantly, the fear is gone. I've learned something through all of this. Actually, several things. The first is that kindness and weakness are not the same thing. The second is that family should never be used as a shield for bad behavior. And the third, truth takes longer. But truth almost always wins. Before I end this story, I want to ask you something. If you were in my position, would you have gathered evidence the way I did? Or would you have confronted them immediately? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely read them. And if you've ever had someone underestimate you simply because of your age, your kindness, or your patience, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because patience is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. And sometimes the people who look the least dangerous are the ones you should underestimate the least. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Thank you for your comments, your support, and your time. And remember this, Megan thought she was breaking into an apartment. What she was really doing was building the case that would destroy her own future. And in the end, she wasn't caught because I was smarter. She was caught because greed convinced her she couldn't be. The moment someone believes they're untouchable, they've already made their biggest mistake.